next question you partially already answered in regard to same-sex marriage, but this kind of takes it up a notch. Would you support constitutional amendment to define marriage as a commitment between one man and one woman?
Do I go first?
Yes.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I support marriage equality. I've always supported marriage equality. I continue to support marriage equality as long as I'm alive. That's right.
Well, you know, I think we're going to get time for more questions. Same goes for me.
Let me just go back to the question for both of you. Would you support a constitutional amendment to define marriage between one man and one woman? This is more about the constitutional amendment question.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely
Okay.
not. I think we both agree.
We got there?
I think we both.
We agreed on something.
What specifically will you do to encourage the greening of our economy?
I think there's a number of things you can do. First of all, I think use tax incentives. Right, we've certainly seen that in solar panels. Don and I have had solar panels on our house for 6 or 7 years now, but candidly, it wasn't the best investment you've ever made from a return on investment. If there wasn't any federal or state rebates, it would have been an absolutely horrible investment. So I think it's appropriate for government to provide some tax incentives and help us go to a more sustainable plan. I think that's one thing you could do. I think you do things through a regulatory process. And the reason I say regulatory is you want to incent businesses equally. Right? So if there's going to be a little extra fee or a little increased business cost, hopefully moderate, to do what's right environmentally, you get a level playing field so that everybody needs to pick their game up a notch. So I do think the federal and state and local governments at all levels are trying to be respectful of the different levels, because sometimes it makes sense to have a federal policy, sometimes it's more of a state, let the states decide on their own, and sometimes the cities should be able to make those decisions. There are plastic bag ban in Long Beach is one. I was the 5th vote, and it irritated a lot of people, and still does, that I supported that measure. I think it was the right thing to do then. I think it's the right thing to do now. And I think once everybody else gets on board, we just say, well, okay, well, maybe Long Beach was a little ahead of its time on that issue. Well, it will clearly be the right thing to do. So I think there are a number of things that we could do, and certainly a tax incentive and regulatory are two of them. Thank you.
Well, I think that one of the things that we can do, you know, we talk about functionality or dysfunctionality of government. I think we can all be very proud that California has led, the legislature has led the nation in moving towards a green, sustainable economy. We are the first state that really introduced legislation for tailpipe emissions, to reduce tailpipe emissions, which then were joined by the other states and finally by the entire nation to increase fuel efficiency. And we've also the first state to move us off a carbon-based economy. We are the first state, or maybe not the first state, but we already began to move towards reduction in not only in our carbon dioxide in AB 32 to reduce the carbon dioxide to protect future generations, because really what we're talking about is not just meeting our own needs. It's how are we going to protect the next generation and the generation that follows this, and we've got to begin to do that. And so I'm going to fight for that. I'm going to fight for the fact that we move away from a carbon-based economy. I'm going to fight for the fact that we move much more towards alternative fuels, that we reduce our amount of gasoline and that we move towards more of an electrification and non-polluting zero emissions transportation systems. And I agree, you need regulations, which is what we have done here to do that. You need incentives, and you also need legislation that moves us in that direction. You know, I fought for many years to have a container fee in the ports of Long Beach, Los Angeles, LA, Oakland, every port in the state of California. And we got that twice to the governor's thing, and that support tremendously by some business interests. Not all, some of the maritime interests actually supported us. That was to find the resources and to let those that are carrying the goods pay, and we would incentivize to create a green economy, to be able to create zero emission systems. That's what we have to do. We have to be able to move goods from the port to the inland empire without polluting anybody, without having any pollution in those communities. And it can be done, and we can have those jobs, and that's what we need to, and they're private sector jobs, and that's what we should be doing.
I'm gonna admit it, I don't think I'm as green as Alan is. I try and live our lives, you know, sustainability. We have a composter on the side of the house, we have solar panels, I drive a hybrid, work to reduce the port's emissions, so we agree on many things, but I would tell you, I'm very concerned that we're not taking a more balanced approach in California. Because I think we all want to be greener, hopefully, yes, we all want to be greener, but how many jobs are you willing to lose? Some, maybe a little more. Would you lose this many? Our economy is stagnant here in the state. How green and how fast do you want to go? How much are you willing to increase unemployment? How much are you willing to decrease tax revenues when businesses that find it too difficult to do business in California due to the regulatory environment, they move outside the state? Last year we had more companies than ever leave the state of California. It's about balance. We all want to be green, but let's just look at what the downside liability can be. And I think we're willing to pay some, hopefully, right? We're all willing to pay something to be a little more environmentally friendly, a little more sustainable, but not too much.
Well, I disagree. Economic development and environmental sustainability, and you don't lose jobs, you gain jobs. It is a positive thing for jobs. That's what it's all about. As I said, when I started 20 years ago this fight, they said, you are crazy, Long. You can't have economic development and sustainability. I fought, and finally everyone, by 2005, 2006, when the ports began to develop their green port policy, and they had been sued, and the communities had come forth, and change is what occurred, and everybody said it was going to be the end of the world as we move towards this. We have more jobs today in the ports than we've ever had before. We have better jobs, higher paying jobs, and we have a cleaner economy. We can have both. That's the future.
You guys are eating up time for questions. I appreciate the applause that I'm going for both the candidates. So another question on corporations. What's the ideal role of the modern corporation in America today, and what's government/Congress's role in regulating corporations in America? And I think Alan.
I think I went first, Mike.
Yeah, Alan.
Well, I don't know. I know the ideal role of corporations. I think that we have today a free market approach. We have a capitalist society. I think the role of corporations hopefully is to make money for their stockholders, but I also believe that they have a social and ethical responsibility to the communities they serve. They are responsible for the impacts that they have on those communities and should be paying them the impacts. That's why I introduced what I said before, the container fee. I didn't say that you should pay for it. I said if you're moving your goods, your pair of sneakers, from the Port of Long Beach to Chicago, and it would only cost a penny or two for you who are making such great amounts of money, to pay for the quality of air that you're impacting, the noise, the congestion, to make sure that we have systems in place that will reduce these impacts. It is your responsibility to pay for that. And it is our responsibility to make sure that we are able then to make sure that you are successful. It is a partnership, and both, but the corporation is responsible for the impacts that it makes on society. And we have to have systems in place that protect the people who live in the communities. Thank you.
I think the question isn't just corporations, right? It's the private sector, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large corporations. What do we look for them to do? We look for them to provide goods and services that we want to take advantage of on a daily basis. We want them to come out with new technology, whether it be the latest iPad or iPhone or whatever it might be. We look for businesses to provide those capabilities. We absolutely want them to be good corporate citizens, have a good partnership, whether it's at a city level or state level or federal level. They have a responsibility, as do all of we, right? We all have a responsibility to the community that we're a part of. And part of it is certainly having an appropriate amount of regulation. The key word is appropriate. Don't want too little is a mess out there. For them too. You know, you look at the financial services, problems that were created, but then they didn't turn out better off. Look how many of those went out of bankruptcy, went into bankruptcy and lost all their value. Maybe not as many as should have, but they did. So you need an appropriate amount of regulation. We are a free market to an extent. We're a capitalistic economy. It's the strongest in the world. It's stumbling currently, but it is the strongest. It's the best system in the world. But it's all about balance. Thank you.
I know, you may not want to. All right, so how will you use your power to shore up the Volcker rule to ban commercial banks from proprietary trading and making the board and chief executive responsible for compliance?
Who's the banker in the group? I mean, certainly go back to the Glass-Steagall Act, which was put in place in 1933 after the Great Depression. It was determined we needed some more departmentalizations. We didn't want banks as core banking business to get into all sorts of other lines of business that really weren't part of what their core mission was. I think we saw what happened. Clearly, part of the problem was under-regulation, right? We got those regulations out of the system, and things got a little unwieldy, got a little Wild West out there, and we all suffered as a result of that. So are the financial institutions. They did great for a while, you know, but where there's a boom, there's a bust. So many of them paid the price as well. And I don't think that our penalties in some of those cases were as severe as they could have been, as they should have been. Right? If organizations are going to be rewarded when they do well, it just seems to make sense to me they should have the downside liability and the downside risk as well. So we do need appropriate safeguards. But you don't want to go overboard. And this, I can give you an example. I had a couple of constituents last year. You'll call your council office for anything, by the way. But a woman that you know was recently divorced, 2 kids, a single mom, mom's living with her, she's getting thrown out of her house. They can't make the payment anymore. As you look into it now, the bank, the evil bank, the bank has sold the house out from under, and she says, common sense, she goes, you know what, for what they sold my house for, and the competitive loan they gave the next person, I can afford that. What I can't afford is a house that's 40% higher loan and an extra 2.5 points. That's a loan I can't afford. I can afford that. Why are you throwing me out of the house? And I talked to the banker. I have some banking history in my career. Talk to the banker and said, how does this make sense for you? Your cost, your transaction, you got to get it right. You got to fix it up. You got to bring them in. You're going to take a haircut. I mean, how is this your best interest to do this? Not to mention society's best interest, but how is it your best interest? There's a federal regulatory issue. Well, you see, if we foreclose, short sale, get rid of her, we take a potentially bad loan, we turn into a good loan. If we work with the woman and we keep her family in there, now it's a bad loan on our books. We could do it once, do it 10 times, maybe 100. Can't do it 1,000. Then the federal regulators are going to come in and say we're a bad bank and we have capital problems. That's crazy. That's crazy. No one benefits. The woman certainly doesn't benefit being thrown out the street. We don't benefit as a society. The bank doesn't even benefit. They're better off keeping her in there and getting payments. But that's a federal regulatory problem. Now that rule was probably put in place for a good reason, right? Didn't want to have too many bad loans on the bank's books, right? So I mean, it makes some sense on why it was. But the unintended consequences for thousands of families across our country is devastating. We need to have some common sense in both parties, so one can't say, I want to change the rule, and then the other party throws mud at them. Both parties need to work together and say, this is wrong, this isn't helpful, this is bad. For our society, we need to work together to fix it. At a time. Thank you.
I do know, kind of taking stock of where we are today in terms of that it was really the deregulation of the banking industry and the ability of commercial banks to become investment bankers also, and the line between the two has blurred it now. And so in such, that enabled banks to bundle mortgages that they never should have had, subprime mortgages, and turn it over to the guy in the other department as an investment, take those mortgages, sell them out to somebody else. That should never happen. Banks should do banking, investment should do, and I strongly support greater regulatory distance between the two and control. We also, after the collapse of the banking industry, and I agree with Gary, those folks never went to jail after they brought this nation to its knees, and they should go to jail, but we also passed Dodd-Frank, and we also passed real controls on banking. We must ensure that we continue those kinds of controls on the banking industry. And the other thing is, right now, we've got to monitor and do oversight. So, for example, right now, all the attorney generals throughout the states sue the largest banks. We won that court case, but you know, there are things that we needed to do, that we put into place, that were not in place up to just recently. So, for example, you could be applying for a modification of your loan, and that bank could call you in and say, yeah, well, let's talk about that. You have to fill out this form and that. We'll work with you, while somebody in the next office is foreclosing on your house at the same time. That cannot be allowed. You cannot allow banks to be both foreclosing and at the same time modifying. Lots of people think that they're working on their loans and they've lost it. We've tried to correct that in California. It needs to be corrected nationwide, and that's just one small step that needs to be done. But a lot of this was done as a result in the last administration of the deregulation of the banking industry. That's what happened.
This will be the final question, and I think it's really appropriate. As a freshman congressman, how do you intend to influence policies that address your priorities or your platform?
It's a great question. You know, we're one of 435. So I'm not going to go and say I can do it. My record has been one of listening to both sides, trying to be fair, trying to be a problem solver, trying to work solutions out, trying to work across the aisle. And I'm going to continue to do that. You know, I'm a Democrat, but yet recently we just went through, and I was the chair of transportation in the state senate for a long time. I fought for high-speed rail to have it passed. I wanted to see high-speed rail in the state, but when I saw the fact that they were investing at a time of great cuts, $6 billion in the Central Valley, I said I can't support that. I have to stand up and do what's fiscally responsible. So I think one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to act in ways that are fiscally responsible at this time. I'm going to stand up to both my own party, as I did with independent redistricting, as I did with high-speed rail, and I'm also going to be a good listener, and I'm going to work across the aisle. People who know me, that's my reputation in Sacramento, as somebody who works with all people. But if you go and ask anybody up there, does he work with everybody? What's his reputation? People will tell you, that's what I do. I know it's going to be difficult because I'm going to a new world, and I'm fortunate enough to be elected in Washington. But I can only tell you I will carry the same skills that I've done. I'm not promising to do it. That's who I am. I will do it.
I think what you can look for me to do as a freshman member of Congress is to try and bring people to the middle. I'm very financially conservative. I'm very fiscally conservative. That's certainly my voting record here in the city of Long Beach for 6 years. If you don't think I'm fiscally prudent, you can ask my wife. They have frugal I am at home. And obviously, I'm much more moderate, perhaps socially liberal on the social issues, so I think you have a good read for where I am. What I'm going to try and do is bring people together to head to the middle. So what I'll do is I'm going to seek out moderates, moderate Democrats, moderate Republicans, the people in the middle, and say, look, folks, we need to figure out how to work together here. I think we all want the same things at the end of the day. We want a better future for our family, better future for our kids, for our grandkids. We want the same thing. I don't care where you are on the economic spectrum.